Right, everybody, thank you for joining me once again. Early start for me this morning. It is currently 4:30 a.m., so apologies for not shaving, but it's okay because it's apparent that Mike hasn't shaved either. As you can tell, today's victim, if you like, is Mike Mutzel, who wants to say stuff about things. So let's put him right wherever he might be wrong. And spoiler, boys and girls, guess what? Well, you'll see. Okay, so Mike, make some progress. Tell us all about stuff and things, and we'll tell you what it is you might not quite have right. Off you go.
When it comes to preventing heart disease and stroke, most doctors are really focused on lowering your LDL cholesterol. But in today's video, we're going to make the case that actually lowering your triglycerides and monitoring your blood triglyceride levels are actually a better indicator of your overall cardiometabolic disease risk.
No, Michael. No. There are no studies in existence which are capable of informing us on risk of heart disease or any other outcome as that relates to any aspect of human nutrition whatsoever. Risk is a cause and effect statement. It implies, by lack of a clear statement to the contrary, that if I modify a certain behavior or a certain physiological level of something, in this case you're talking about triglycerides, then I can expect, personally me, I can expect a commensurate reduction in my personal risk of a heart disease outcome, short, medium, or long term. That is false. There are no studies that can underpin such a claim. What you're doing, Mike, basically, is you're making a video to shoot down the idea of a false prophet, that being the idea that LDL is somehow able to predict heart disease outcomes, which it isn't any more than triglycerides is. And what you're basically doing is you're replacing one false prophet with another one. Now you're saying, oh no, triglycerides is the answer. Well, no, Mike, it still isn't. That's not the answer either. Heart disease is not caused by LDL. Neither is it caused by cholesterol. Neither is it caused by any of the subfraction of any of the lipoproteins or the lipids. Atherosclerosis, heart disease, is not a lipid dysfunction. Sorry about that. But we'll get to the details as you expound more upon your new false idol here, your new shiny false idol.
You might say, well, why is that, Mike? What about triglycerides? My doctor hasn't actually mentioned my triglycerides. I don't even know what my blood triglyceride level is or are. So what do I do? So let's talk a little bit more about that. Now, let me just pause here because just last week, there was a recent analysis it was a meta-analysis including over 20 studies involving over 140,000 individuals. This was published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, finding that statin treatment by LDL cholesterol reduction has a minimal, marginal, and inconsistent benefit with overall reduction in all-cause and cardiovascular disease, mortality, and incidence of stroke. Okay,
so that's no surprise. Making a pharmacological intervention to LDL in order to attempt to have a meaningful impact on heart disease, incidence, or mortality is a fool's errand. Because, as I've already said, LDL is not the cause of heart disease, so lowering it will not have a meaningful impact upon heart disease, except to potentially make it possibly even more likely, rather than less. But that's for another day. We'll get into the pharmacology of statins in detail another day when I can be bothered with that. So no surprise in this study. Okay, so Mike's making the point that he doesn't think LDL is a particularly robust or useful marker of what he's calling risk, and he's right, it isn't.
Okay. So again, after years, since 1994, when this 4S study came out, there was various studies to show that lipid lowering by way of statins is going to really completely change the prevalence of heart disease-related deaths and so forth.
Yeah, how did that turn out? Hasn't done, has it? I wonder why.
In the U.S. and throughout the world. Now, what have we seen since then? Well, according to data from last year, our own CDC found that amid a respiratory virus pandemic, heart disease was still
what now, Michael? Sorry. Pardon?
The leading cause of mortality. Heart disease was also the leading risk factor behind age and obesity with regards to...
No, not risk factor. Again, risk is a cause and effect statement. It implies that modifying a certain behavior, the risk factor, will have a predictable, known effect on someone's individual risk. There are no studies to underpin such a thing. Risk factors do not exist, Mike. They are a buzz term. They are a construct. They're an idea. They're a nice idea. They're just not underpinned by science. Sorry about that.
Here, COVID. So what's the marker that you can measure at your next physical or just going to a lab and checking to see if you're at risk for...
No, Michael, still. No.
Cardiometabolic disease. My friends, it's not LDL cholesterol.
We know that. And by the way, there is no such thing, Mike, as LDL cholesterol. It doesn't exist. LDL and cholesterol are two separate things. Okay? Cholesterol is the passenger, if you like, and LDL is the vehicle in which that passenger travels, if you like. LDL is not cholesterol, and cholesterol is not LDL. They're separate things. They travel together, but they are not a thing that actually exists.
It's not. I'm sorry, because LDL cholesterol changes. One of the best ways to really be more specific about measuring the atherogenicity.
No, Mike, sorry, no. Atherogenic lipoproteins is another construct. It's another nice idea. It's a buzz term without any science behind it. There are no lipoproteins that have been established to be the cause of atherosclerosis. Cause and effect inference in science is made according to some very, very clear and completely unnegotiable conditions. Failure to meet those conditions means you have failed to establish cause and effect, and you have a hypothesis. You have an idea. Okay? So we need to lose this term atherogenicity or atherogenic lipoproteins, because there aren't any. None of the proteins cause heart disease, as it turns out.
Associated with LDL cholesterol is
No, not LDL cholesterol. Remember, that doesn't exist.
ApoB. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but...
Oh, yeah, you'll probably get it wrong.
I think it's actually better just to focus today on triglycerides.
Why, Michael? On the basis of what science exactly? What is it that would lead you to believe that we should focus on triglycerides? Shall we wait for that? Yeah, there's no science that would tell us we need to focus on triglycerides, Mike. They no more cause heart disease than does LDL or cholesterol or ApoB or saturated fat or any of the lipoproteins. It is not a lipid disease or dysfunction. Okay? Atherosclerosis is an immune inflammatory dysfunction. You're looking in completely the wrong place for the cause and effect relationship. And as such, you will not be able to show anyone any marker that will give them any ability to suggest what their metabolic health or likely health outcomes down the track are or will be, because you're completely off the planet. Okay? Sorry about that.
Because triglycerides and the triglyceride-rich lipoproteins, the remnant lipoproteins, RLP, so remnant lipoproteins, these are little spherical triglyceride-rich lipoproteins. They tend to be more atherogenic and linked.
No, Michael, there is no evidence providing for a cause and effect relationship such as atherogenic, which is another cause and effect statement, isn't it? Atherogenic means the cause of atherosclerosis. There is no evidence to support that claim. It's an idea and it's false. It's an association, Mike. In exactly the same way that the sale of ice creams is a really good associate to the incidence of sunburn at Miami Beach on any given day. Does that mean that we need to take care of the sunburn problem by outlawing the sale of ice creams, Michael? It's ridiculous, isn't it? Absolutely ridiculous, but that's what you've got here, and nothing better than that. Another example, forest fires, fire crews, always there, aren't they? They must be the cause of the forest fires. Let's deal with the forest fire scourge by outlawing fire crews. Good idea, Michael, or not, you think? Because that's what we got here with your ApoB and your RLP and your triglycerides and your LDL and your cholesterol and your saturated fat ideas. Here's a third example, just for fun. The release of movies starring Nicolas Cage bears a strong positive relationship with drownings in swimming pools. Does that mean we outlaw movies by Nicolas Cage? I'd be for it, myself. I would. But it won't have any effect whatsoever on drownings in swimming pools, will it, Michael? Any more than attempting to moderate your lipids will have any effect on your heart disease outcome likelihood. Okay? I hope this is going up some flagpoles.
With insulin resistance.
No, insulin. Oh, Mike. Insulin resistance is a construct. Okay, please give me the name of a company that I can go to, that I can contact tomorrow and order for myself a set of insulin resistance meters that I can start using on my patients tomorrow. There isn't one. It doesn't exist. There is no such thing. Insulin resistance. You can measure blood glucose instantaneously or across time. Same is true of insulin. Those are the things you need to put into a sum to work out this so-called construct called insulin resistance. They're the things you can actually measure physiologically. They're the actual real phenomenological things. Insulin resistance is an idea, Mike. And it's just nonsense. I think I've covered that in great depth already on my Fine Actually Science-Based channel if people want to check it out. Maybe I'll talk about it more in this one. I don't know. We'll see. Depends how I feel.
So this is, I think, the most important thing. And let me just, before we get into why insulin resistance is linked with heart disease.
Yeah, insulin resistance is still a construct, Michael. It still doesn't exist.
And how looking at triglycerides, looking at your ApoB, looking at your remnant lipoproteins and VLDL is a better way to get an overall assessment of your cardiometabolic risk.
No, not risk. See, we're still talking about risk, aren't we, Michael? No, there are no studies that can inform us on risk. None at all. These are all associates to various health presentations. The stuff you're talking about here, none of them are the cause of heart disease. As such, messing about with any of them is not going to have any effect on it.
Compared to just looking at LDL cholesterol.
LDL cholesterol still doesn't exist, Michael. Remember?
Just want to welcome you back before we dive into it. It's Mike Mutzel. As always, friends, thank you for being here. We are going to dive into metabolic health. I'm glad that you're enjoying this video. If you are, hit that like button. Be sure to leave a
No, I'm not enjoying it, Mike. It's been a load of rubbish so far.
Comment below and directly share this with a friend who you know is focused on LDL cholesterol, because I can tell you, dinner conversations with friends or family.
Yeah, I would suggest if people want to get some information out to their loved ones, friends, colleagues, whatever, that's actually science-based and sensible and underpinned by some knowledge and experience in the field, I would suggest that you want to stay away from Mike's channel, frankly. Sorry about that, Mike, but this is just rubbish. Absolute nonsense.
They'll be like, oh yeah, my LDL is good. It's 110, and someone will say, oh, mine's better. It's 90, right?
That's not necessarily better.
Then you say, well, what are your triglycerides? They're going to say, my what? They don't really know, right? So we want to share and spread the message that triglyceride reduction and monitoring is actually a little bit better.
No, it isn't, Michael. Still. False. Another false prophet in the place of the last false prophet. When do you learn, Michael? What does it take to get this through to you? Atherosclerosis is an immune inflammatory dysfunction, not a lipid dysfunction. Okay?
So thank you for helping us spread that message. Okay. So you have a meal. Oh, I'm going to draw it over here. I'm getting tired.
Yeah, have a plan, Mike. Before you start your video, know where you're going to put things on the board. Have a plan of where things are.
Space. So you have your mixed meal. Okay.
Why would you do that? That's a very, very bad idea. A mixed meal. It's the last thing you should do.
That is going to go through your chylomicrons.
Well, some of it might, depending on what was in that mixed meal.
To your liver. You can see how bad I am at drawing your. This is your liver. Okay.
If you say so, Mike.
You're going to have these chylomicrons and these triglyceride-rich lipoproteins starting to be secreted after a meal. Okay.
Well, why would they be triglyceride-rich after a meal, Michael? What kind of meal are you talking about?
So these are little chylomicrons and triglyceride enriched.
This is you standing there drawing circles on a whiteboard, Michael. Are you going to tell us anything that's actually backed by science or anything that's remotely sensible at all? Or are you just going to draw circles on the board and say, risk, risk, risk? What are you doing? And please stop doing it. Okay, until you are educated in this field, this is not a field that you should be talking to the public about.
Rich remnants and VLDL and IDLs and so forth, and those are going to go out into your periphery. These are actually much more atherogenic.
No, they're not, Michael. Still, there are no atherogenic lipoproteins. Still. It's a buzz term. It's a word that is being used inappropriately by certain factions within the so-called scientific fraternity. It is not a scientific reality. Still.
Compared to just your straight up LDL. And this is missing that when you're getting your blood work. And so what I suggest, if you know your LDL and you're on a statin or you were told to.
Why on earth would you do that?
Be on a statin, check your ApoB because that's going to look.
Why, Michael? That will not give us any information of utility either. It no more causes heart disease than does LDL or cholesterol or triglycerides or saturated fat or any of the lipids. Okay?
At all of the atherogenic lipoprotein.
No, still false.
Particles. The IDLs, the VLDLs, the remnants, the LDLs, and all the different stuff.
None of those are atherogenic.
Right. And so look at your ApoB to A1 ratio.
Why, Michael? For what reason? Shall we wait for some science? Some experimental science that tells us that that's problematic in any way in terms of our likelihood, our personal individual likelihood of a disease process of any kind.
My friends, this will cost you about $13.
That's a waste of $13.
Maybe less. I mean, that's the price that I pay for this when I would order it for clients through LabCorp. $12 to $13.
Hang on, is it 12 or 13, Mike? By the way, it's a waste of however much it is.
So money is not an issue here, right? But
it is for a lot of people.
The triglycerides is also going to give you an indicator here because
of what, Michael? What is triglyceride going to give us an indicator of exactly?
The reason why LDL is not all that good is
because it's not the cause of heart disease. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Goodness me.
Look at, in terms of a measurement of atherogenic risk.
No, still. Absolutely not.
If you look at a low density lipoprotein particle, you have triglyceride in here, TG. You also have cholesterol esters.
All sorts of things are in there. Anything that's a lipid, basically, that won't dissolve in water is carried by the lipoproteins. Yep.
Okay. Now, when you're insulin resistant.
No, still a construct. Still doesn't exist as a real physiological state of being. I've covered it in great detail on my channel, Mike. Go and look up the Randall cycle. You'll understand it much better when you've looked through all that material.
There is significantly more triglyceride molecules compared to the cholesterol esters. So you're
under what circumstances does that occur, Michael?
LDL levels could actually be lower then would be indicated compared to your insulin resistance.
No, this is still a construct.
State, in your insulin sensitive state, in your overall metabolic health. And so,
no, metabolic health has nothing to do with whether or not insulin is currently allowing sugar to enter your cells or whether it isn't currently. The reason that cells will disallow the effect of insulin is because of the Randall cycle, Michael. And that's a normal, natural part of your metabolism that has evolved over the entire period of time that the species has existed, and then some, frankly. It's normal, it's natural, it's not a disease process, it's not a dysfunction, it's not a problem. This whole idea that there's this thing called insulin resistance that's pathological, no, false, Michael, another construct. Okay? Go and study the Randall cycle and its ramifications on my channel. Binge watch it, Mike. You'll learn a lot.
this is what a lot of doctors don't realize.
Doctors don't realize a lot of things about a lot of things, Mike. Doctors have very specific training. It's very paint by numbers. They're not allowed to think for themselves, pretty much. They are told, if then, basically, if these are the signs and symptoms, then this is how you act. Okay? Doctors are trained to make a differential diagnosis based on the models that they're working with, correct or otherwise, and act accordingly. What's your point?
Is the Friedewald equation is not accounting for triglyceride-rich lipoproteins.
Well, wouldn't make any difference if it did, because triglycerides don't cause heart disease, Michael. Okay, still.
And so as you become more metabolically unhealthy...
Okay, how are you going to define that? Is that by insulin resistance? Because that's healthy. That should be happening. That's the normal, natural functioning of the body doing what it should do. The pathology is pouring too many carbohydrates down your neck. That's what needs to be ameliorated, stopped immediately, in fact, is what needs to happen. Well, I say stopped immediately. You really should change your diet slowly over 6 to 8 weeks, to be fair. Don't change your diet overnight.
These lipoprotein particles that are circulating are actually triglyceride enriched.
Yeah, you've said that, but under what circumstances does that occur? You still haven't told us what might happen that would cause our triglyceride levels to be higher in our lipoproteins than otherwise. We're still waiting for that. Did you have a plan before you started your video, Mike, at all? Seems like not really. Did you do any actual study to actually understand this field at all? That you certainly didn't do. It's a shame for you.
And so what you can actually see is people lose weight sometimes. And
weight, you say? Goodness gracious. Wow.
They become more metabolically healthy.
Defined how? What's metabolically healthy, Mike?
Oftentimes, their cholesterol levels increase.
Yes, so? So what?
It's not necessarily a bad thing.
It necessarily is not a bad thing if your cholesterol increases. The level of cholesterol in your body is under the close, tight constraint of your genes, those genes reacting to the environment in which you place them at any given time to best optimize what the optimized level of cholesterol should be in your body right now. The genes have been doing it for a very, very, very long time, Michael. They really know what they're doing. Okay, what's next?
Because the quantity of cholesterol esters as a proportion or as a function of overall composition of material that's floating around in the lipoprotein particles increases. Because
yeah, under what circumstances? Still.
They're becoming more insulin sensitive and the
No, still a construct.
triglyceride component is decreasing.
Not necessarily. The level of triglyceride and other lipids in a lipoprotein particle, any given one, and the overall balance in your overall LDL packages in your blood at any given time responds to multiple inputs. These are independent variables, Michael. And so the balance is a multi-input mixed outcome variable. And as such, the informative value of it is extremely limited without understanding all the extenuating circumstances. Okay?
Does that make sense if we think about...
No, Michael, nothing you're saying is making any sense. It's just waffle, it's noise. It's ignorant waffle and noise. Okay? Sorry to call you out, but this is just rubbish from start to finish.
These lipoprotein particles like cars on the road.
No, they're not like cars on the road.
Essentially, we're just moving we're changing seats. We're having musical chairs in terms of what's contained in the cargo. And the triglyceride number actually decreases. And that is...
Under what circumstances, Michael? Still.
Or a reflection of an improvement in your metabolic health.
No, it isn't necessarily at all. False. Just because you say so? They're going to back that up with anything at all? No? Okay.
Not a regression. And this is why, my friends, various studies are actually looking at...
Various studies. What studies, Michael? Cite them. You want to talk about various studies, you cite them so that we can look at those studies and see whether they are good, bad, or indifferent studies, and whether or not they are able to make the claims predictably that they claim to be able to make. Studies show. I'll tell you what studies also show, Michael. Studies show that failure to hit the like button on my videos is highly correlated with late night visits from Yellow Ted, and he will bring his fluffy yellow truncheon. You don't want that. Hit the like button. It's not hard. Get it done. Doesn't even cost you anything. It's not even an effort. Why do I have to keep asking you people to hit the like button? Studies show. Right. Studies also show that failure to hit the like button is associated with reduced metabolic health.
Hey, we ought to rethink the LDL cholesterol.
I think you ought to rethink, Michael, and I think you ought to rethink whether or not you ought to be making videos about metabolic health, frankly, because it's quite clear that your knowledge base in this field is, well, to all intents and purposes, none at all. You have disinformation, but that's all you have. Do you have a competent faculty of scientific reasoning behind you? No. Do you have any experience as a scientist in your own right? No. Are you a clinician? No. Is this something you ought to be doing? Or is this out of your lane? Comment below the video, folks. Let me know whether you think Mike's out of his lane here. Whether he should get back in it. Up to you. Of course, you'll agree with me because that's the rules here on my channel. For anyone that's new to the channel and doesn't already know, the rules on my channel are anyone that disagrees with me is guilty of hate speech. Studies show.
Hypothesis as it's related to heart disease.
Yes, hypothesis.
And reconsider and reprioritize triglycerides.
No. So that's replacing one false prophet with another one that won't predict heart disease any better. Neither will modifying that factor have any impact on heart disease because it still doesn't cause heart disease. Okay?
That's because it turns out that the postprandial increase in the atherogenesis and the
no, not atherogenesis. Still, no.
Phenomenon associated with heart disease is linked more to the remnant lipoproteins and the triglyceride-rich lipoproteins that are.
That doesn't mean it's the cause. So modifying that factor won't have any impact still. Just like banning the sale of ice creams at Miami Beach will not affect sunburn. Okay, neither will banning movies by Nicolas Cage sort out anything except my desire to never see another film made by Nicolas Cage. It won't help drownings in swimming pools, okay? Neither will banning fire crews help with the fire situation. It'll make it worse, in fact. Okay, so can we move on now to some actual science at any stage? Do you have any of that? No, that's what I thought.
Causing atherogenesis.
No, except causing. See that? Causing? No, Mike. No. Causing atherogenicity? No. Buzzwords, constructs, ideas, hypotheses, not science. Okay? No.
So we should be focusing on triglycerides.
No, we shouldn't, still.
Okay?
No, it's not okay, Michael. Not okay at all. You are out of your depth. You are out of your lane. You are talking about something that you know nothing about. It's not okay. It's not good enough. This needs to stop. Okay?
So here's kind of a messy overview.
Yeah. There's nothing on there that's informative. That's just things drawn on a board, like some nice circles and a few letters and things. There's no science there at all. Science is done empirically, experimentally, with numbers, Michael. This is the mad, maniacal ravings of charlatan on the board here. Sorry. Spade's a spade. And you're out of your lane.
Talk about some basic numbers.
All right, basic numbers, good.
You might say, okay, Mike, so I'm convinced I should be focused.
Why would we be convinced by anything you've had to say, Michael, on this topic thus far? What have you said that would have convinced us of anything at all? What science have you produced at all? Wow.
Focusing on my triglyceride numbers. What's an ideal number? Well,
okay. Based on what science?
Generally, what I suggest for most clients is I want to see it around 60 to 70.
On what science, Michael? Should I just pull numbers out of my rectum as well, whenever I feel like it on any topic? As a clinician, as a scientist? Never mind backing up any of my assertions with any actual experimental, empirical evidence. I'll just make some numbers up. Approximately 60 to 70. Great. Why, Michael? For what possible reason would you put that number up there on the board?
70. Okay. Some people come in and their blood triglycerides, and by the way, it depends on when your last meal was and the composition of your last meal.
All right. So it's a variable with no value at all. That's what I thought.
You need to understand if you do a non-fasted blood level, like you test your labs and compare that to fasted, they're going to be totally different.
Yeah, right. So that's interesting, isn't it? It's almost as if they're not connected. It's almost as if one is a short-term, highly variable physiological marker of your current blood lipids, and the other one is a long-term disease process which is not connected to those lipids anyway. Did you think of that, Michael, perhaps?
Okay. Triglycerides fluctuate just like your glucose.
There you go. Only glucose really is one of those things that you could hang without too much second thought as a probable cause of atherosclerosis, one potential causal factor, precisely because there is actually a mechanism, a feasible mechanism by which that can occur. The glycation of epithelial cells, for example, and the inflammation attendant with that and the immune response attendant with that. It's the actual mechanism, actual feasible, workable mechanism by which this might be a cause, or is likely to be a cause. Okay? Not so with lipids. No mechanism exists.
So in the fasted state, there's going to be changes compared to in the post-meal state. So I suggest getting a baseline.
Why? Why would you do that?
Blood work done. Check your fasted triglycerides. See where those are at after a 12 to 14 hour fast. Now, let's say they're at 110, they're at 120, or let's say they look really good. They're at 60.
Hang on. Well, who's to say that 60 is better than 120, Mike? What science underpins that? Exactly.
Wow, I am so metabolically healthy. I'm good.
Oh, right. So we're going to base our metabolic health determination on our triglycerides in our blood, are we? Because if we do, we've clearly got no idea about metabolic health, because that's not a marker of metabolic health at all. I tell you what, the measurement of triglycerides in your blood is a marker of, I'll tell you. It's a marker of how much triglyceride is in your blood at the time that blood was drawn. And nothing else. That's all it is. Okay? It's pretty straightforward, really, isn't it? Oh, God.
I don't need to worry about any of this stuff. Okay, next time you do your labs, let's have you have a mixed meal.
Why would you do that still? Go and binge watch my channel, Michael. You will learn the error of your ways. Grasshopper.
With about 60 to 70 grams of fat.
Why? About 60 to 70 grams of fat. Mixed with what, by the way? What are we going to mix that with? Carbohydrates? That's a bad idea, isn't it, boys and girls? And attack helicopters. Bad idea. Randall cycle. Inflammation.
For you, whether you're vegan or vegetarian or you're a carnivore or you're keto, eat a standard meal that you would habitually normally eat. For me, that would be ground beef and eggs, maybe with some avocado.
No, I leave the avocado out, Mike.
Something like that, right? Now, and this is called a lipid load test, because you actually want to see not just what...
No, it's not. If you mix the lipid that you've eaten with anything else, it's no longer a lipid load test. Now it's a response to a mixed meal test. And the meal you've just described is a mixture of mostly fat and protein. Well done for that. However, it does have a little bit of carbohydrate and fiber in it, which it shouldn't have, Michael. Get those things out of there. But that's what you're testing, not the lipids. The way to test lipid loading is to eat nothing but lipids. Okay? That's what scientists do. They control things. You don't have more than one variable. Otherwise, how do you know what's associated with what cause and effect? You don't. It's the first thing you learn on your first morning of your first undergraduate degree as a scientist, Michael. How is it that you missed that class?
Your fasting triglycerides are, but your post-meal triglycerides. This is called the lipid load test.
No, it's not a lipid load test still. You can call it that, but it doesn't mean it is one. It isn't. It's a mixed meal load test. Okay? And it depends on what meal you ate as to how your body's going to respond. Obviously. Because one meal and another meal are not the same in terms of the effect that will be seen downstream in the blood triglycerides at a set time after consuming that meal. Okay?
LLT. Okay? A lot of people are talking about this. There was a consensus paper way back going to...
Oh, consensus papers. I'm convinced, Michael. That's all we need. We don't need actual science or experimentation or empirical evidence of any kind. We just need a consensus. Good. I'm here all week.
2010, I can share it on the screen here, where cardiologists and experts and...
Who's to say who's an expert, Michael? Who determines expert status? You?
Cardiovascular disease, we're saying, gosh, why are we telling all of our patients to fast before doing labs when we know that the process...
To standardize. Because the level of lipids in your blood are, of course, going to react transiently to the intake of food postprandially. So either you take a fasted level or you tell someone to eat an absolutely standard meal, the same meal everybody, with the mass of food taken and adjusted for that person's body mass or lean mass. I don't know. I haven't really thought about how I would set it up, because I wouldn't bother with any of this. It will not inform on heart disease likelihood or risk or metabolic health. The only thing a test of blood triglycerides will inform on is what the level of triglycerides in that person's blood were at that time. Nothing else. Still. Okay? Okay?
Process of atherosclerosis starts after the meal.
No, it doesn't. The process of atherosclerosis is a slow, chronic, creeping dysfunction which occurs over decades. Goodness gracious.
People don't get heart disease when they're fasting. They get heart disease after they eat Big Macs and cupcakes and donuts.
Not so, Michael. Those nonsensical junk food items you've just listed are not likely to predispose someone to good metabolic health or cardiovascular health, absolutely. But there's still no actual cause and effect evidence that they are the cause, any more than triglycerides or LDL or cholesterol or ApoB or RLP or any of that. Still, the mechanism is the fact that they are carbohydrate and fat mixed together in fair proportions of each, thus activating the Randall cycle, thus causing inflammation. And inflammation absolutely is an etiological underpinning of atherosclerosis, heart disease. Mechanism. Okay?
Right? So we should be seeing what those cupcakes...
The atherosclerosis is slowly developing glacially over decades. It's not the response to any one meal here or there. It's about what's chronically going on. Okay? Let's start communicating effectively, Mike. For goodness sake.
Ding-dongs are doing to people's triglycerides. And guess what they do? They jack them up through them.
Well, yes. I wonder why. Well, I don't wonder why. In fact, I know why. You mix carbohydrate and fat like that in your ding-dongs and your whatever else you were just talking about. Randall cycle. Triglyceride formation. Raised blood sugar and raised blood triglycerides. Inflammation as well. Cool. Does that make the triglyceride the cause of heart disease? No. The likely causes are the jacked up sugar and the inflammation. The raising of the triglyceride level is the body's attempt to process as much of the sugar as it possibly can out of the blood as quickly as it can and put it into a non-threatening format, that being triglyceride, which does not cause heart disease. Okay?
Through the roof. And so
as opposed to overly adipose individuals, people with obesity, because that does cause heart disease by a different series of mechanisms. Okay? I'm talking about elevated triglyceride in the blood at any given time. Is that a cause of heart disease? No. Not at all.
Degree of your insulin resistance...
No, still a construct. Still doesn't exist.
...is actually reflected in your post-meal triglyceride level.
No, that's not a measurement of your insulin resistance. It's a measurement of how much you have activated the Randall cycle on that occasion by eating a meal that's mixed in carbohydrate and fat, which you should not do. Ever. How do you ameliorate the risk of heart disease attendant to the inflammation, absolutely cause and effect linked to activation of the Randall cycle? Well, stop eating carbohydrates. That's how you do it. Fat by itself won't cause a problem.
I know a lot of people are focused on, just standard glucose levels and ketones and insulin. All that stuff is helpful to look at.
Probably not. Probably not very useful. Especially if the clinician looking at that stuff has no idea how to interpret that stuff or what any of it means or how to effectively counsel their patient or their client or whatever the case may be on how to ameliorate their lifestyle in such a way as to actually be likely to have an impact on their likelihood of a deleterious outcome down the track at any stage. Okay?
But when your liver starts to get unhealthy and infiltrated with fat, you will see a dramatic increase in the post-meal triglyceride level.
Yes. But what causes non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome, Michael? What exactly causes that? Are you going to tell us that?
Levels. So you might say, okay, Mike, I'm convinced I should.
Again, why would we be convinced by anything you've had to say thus far, Michael? What have you said that would lead us to feel convinced about anything whatsoever?
Should now be looking at post-meal triglyceride level.
No, you shouldn't. Because I'll tell you what, eat a species-appropriate, species-specific diet, which consists of the muscle meat and associated fat of large ruminant animals, butter, salt to taste, and water. You will never have to test anything in your blood ever again for any indicator of any problem, because you won't have any problems. That is the outcome of what you should do. Just eat a species-appropriate diet. Stop wasting your time, money, and energies on listening to these buffoons who think that the answer to keeping you healthy is to measure completely irrelevant parameters, instead of actually telling you to do the right thing. Okay?
After I know my baseline, what's the number? Okay? If your post-meal triglyceride levels go up over 220 milligrams per DL, that is a problem.
On the basis of what science, Michael? Another number that you have pulled unceremoniously from your anal orifice. What backs that up? Why would you say 220 milligrams per deciliter is a problem, unequivocally, without any qualification of any kind? Surely your response following any given meal will depend on a couple of things. Firstly and foremostly, what was the makeup of that particular meal exactly, and how much mass of food was involved in that one sitting? And two, what have you been chronically doing for the last X amount of time prior to that event? This is ridiculous, Michael. Absolutely, utterly anti-scientific rubbish.
Friends, because that means that you have an inability to process fat in the post-meal window.
It means no such thing necessarily.
Most likely because you have some fat infiltration in your liver and you have some...
So we're going to guess completely, are we? Sure, non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome is quite common in people that consume exogenous carbohydrates as part of their diet to any significant degree. But that's not necessarily the underpinning etiology or cause of a response in the blood triglyceride level over 220 on any given occasion. Total guess.
Degree of insulin resistance. Okay.
No, insulin resistance is still a non-existent construct.
So, to recap.
Recap what, Michael? You haven't said anything that was correct. You've made noise and drawn some circles on the board and said risk, risk, risk.
We know that LDL cholesterol doesn't tell us the whole story.
It doesn't tell us anything that we need to know about anything. And it's not cholesterol. LDL is a lipoprotein, not cholesterol. And cholesterol is cholesterol. It's not a lipoprotein. LDL cholesterol still doesn't exist, Michael.
Because the low-density lipoprotein particles also carry triglycerides.
Yeah, you said that, but it didn't mean anything the first time you said it. We knew that already.
They can become enriched in triglycerides.
Yes, we knew that too.
And so a low LDL cholesterol does not tell you about your cardiometabolic risk.
Neither does triglyceride level, Michael, or ApoB, or RLP, or triglyceride ratio in those LDL particles. None of those things tell you about the risk of anything whatsoever. Still.
Because we know that cardiovascular disease cannot be disentangled from metabolic disease.
How are you going to define metabolic disease, Michael? Because the only thing you've given us to hang our hats on is a construct that doesn't exist. Some imagined pathology called insulin resistance. No.
Insulin resistance.
No, still.
Insulinemia is baked into the process of atherosclerosis.
So now you're saying you can't get atherosclerosis without having hyperinsulinemia, which is also false, Michael. Completely false. Not true at all. You can get heart disease without hyperinsulinemia. Who told you that? Where are you getting these ideas from? Wow.
It's in the narrowing of your arteries. That's big point number one. Big point number two, you need to know your fasting triglyceride levels.
No, you don't, still. No.
Once you know that, on your next labs, it could be a year later, 12 months later, 6 months later, if you're really being proactive, you can then have a mixed meal that has...
It might be useful to look at your triglycerides if you've already determined that your A1C has drifted up above 5.4 and your fasting blood glucose tends to sit around about 115 to 120, then you might want to have a look at your triglycerides and see if they're elevated as well, which they will be in that circumstance. But the test to confirm that is not really particularly informative, because if your glucose and A1C are already up, then you know you've got a problem. Guess what the problem is? Too many carbohydrates in your diet. Guess what the solution is? Stop pouring carbohydrates down your neck. Problem solved. Okay?
Between 60 and 80 grams of fat.
Based on what science? Based on what, Michael? Still.
And see what your post-meal, your non-fasting triglyceride levels are at. If they're north of 200...
Again, you said 220 before. Now it's 200. Is it going to be 180 next week? Is it like the LDL targets drops every week because you can make more money that way or something? It's still not an informative thing. Depends on what you mix that 60 to 80 grams of fat with, Michael, in that meal. And it also depends what you've been doing prior to that for X amount of time, as I said. Wow.
You need to make some improvements, which is where we're going to focus on right now.
Well, you're going to get this right. I wonder.
What are those improvements?
Let's hear them.
Well, there's 1,000,001 ways to improve.
1,000,001. We don't have time for that, Michael. You've only got a minute or two left of your video.
Metabolic health.
Again, how are you defining metabolic health? Because we're still waiting for that.
As you know, my bias is exercise because...
Well, okay. Mike, I'm an exercise physiologist first and foremost. Before I was a human nutritionist and before I was a cardiovascular pathophysiologist, I did the first 10 years of my academic career were as an exercise physiologist first and foremost. And I can tell you that the benefits of appropriately planned, appropriately executed exercise at the right intensity, at the right volume, at the right frequency, on the right schedule, there are some great benefits to be had there, so long as you do everything correctly. But exercise is not the answer for metabolic health. Eating a species-appropriate, species-specific diet is the answer for metabolic health. Okay? Exercise provides physical fitness, which is a different thing.
The more insulin sensitive your muscles are.
Again, no, still a construct. False. Having a larger amount of muscle mass means that those muscles require more glucose to keep the homeostatic level of glycogen in those muscles maintained 24/7. The level of which in those trained muscles is a training status dependent factor as well, Michael. Muscle mass will not affect your insulin sensitivity because it still doesn't exist. When cells refuse glucose, the exact mechanism of that is via the Randle cycle, and it's the part of the Randle cycle that basically binds a cyclic AMP kinase to the GLUT4 transporter on the inside of the cell that locks that transporter out so that it will not accept glucose. And it does that because it's replete with energy. It's a way of protecting the cell from damage that it would otherwise suffer from having a level of glucose above that which is safe to prevent the important inner workings of that cell being damaged by glycation, basically. The cell is always sensitive to insulin. Sometimes it's locked out because the cell has all the energy it needs. The door will not be unlocked until the cell energy level drops below a certain set point that unlocks that cyclic AMP kinase lock, for want of a better term. It's actually a slider. It's not so much an open-closed lock on-off switch. It's more a fader. But that's the concept. Insulin resistance is a complete fallacy, Michael. It's nonsense, okay? Bring yourself up to speed with this. We've only known about the Randle cycle since 1962. Okay, this is not new information.
The more glucose you can dispose of in your muscles, the more buffer room you have. If you
don't need buffer room. What you need to do is you need to not eat carbohydrates because there's no place for carbohydrates in the human diet, none at all. That's what you need to do. Simple.
The bandwagon and have some standard American food.
You don't want to do that though. Ever. Now, on the odd occasion, people are going to do that, sure. Some people. That's a decision those people have to make at that time. They'll pay the price for it as well, probably, but that's for another day.
To a birthday party, a Halloween party, whatever, you are going to have a little bit more.
Are you telling me you could not go to a social event like a birthday party or a Halloween party and enjoy that and enjoy the social interactions, enjoy the discussions with those people that are there or whatever you're doing without stuffing your face with unnecessary, contraindicated, toxic sugar and other carbohydrates, which break down also to sugar? There's no way to enjoy that if you don't poison yourself. Is that what we're saying? Hello, Michael. Hello. Goodness gracious me, this isn't getting better, is it?
Ability to deposit some of that post-meal energy into your muscle tissue.
It's not energy. Energy is also a construct, Michael. It's mass, it's matter, it's carbohydrates, fatty acids, amino acids is what food is. Physical stuff, actual matter, not energy. Okay?
Insulin-sensitive muscle is...
All muscle is insulin-sensitive at all times. Sometimes the mechanism is turned off or the fader is pulled down, shall we say. And that's appropriate. That's to protect the cells, as I've said.
Basically a sponge, a repository for both fats and also glucose.
It's not a sponge or a repository. It's a tissue that requires those substances as a fuel source. And when it has enough, you stop. It stops accepting more. It's like the fuel tank in a car. It has a certain capacity. You cannot put 50 gallons of fuel into a car that has a petrol tank or gas tank that is 40 gallons in capacity. That doesn't work. You can't do that. The same is true with muscle cells and all other cells as well. We're talking muscle cells because they're one of the more energy-hungry types of cells. That and neurons, brain cells and neurons are the most, actually. But that's for another day.
We know that as well. So I'm a huge fan of that. And it's one of the best ways to lower your triglycerides.
Oh, my God. You don't need to lower your triglycerides. What you need to do is eat a species-appropriate, species-specific diet, and your triglyceride level will be optimized naturally. All the derangements that you will find, both short and long-term in a human body, of a metabolic nature, at their root cause, at their etiology, every single one of those dysfunctions, you will find the consumption of carbohydrates in the diet as the cause. Black and white, simple. Physiological fact, Michael. That is what you need to sort out. You need to not eat carbohydrates. Okay?
I should say exercise, which is synonymous with healthy muscle.
No, it isn't necessarily at all. False. No, Michael.
It's one of the best ways to lower your triglycerides and your
Again, you still don't need to do that.
Glucose and your insulin. So that's number one.
Well, no, actually, the best way to lower your glucose is to not pour carbohydrates down your neck. So wrong again, Michael.
Eating a low-carb diet. And
yes, zero, in fact, not low, none.
A million and one ways to go about it.
First thing you've got even remotely right, and you still didn't get it quite right, Michael. Zero carbohydrate diet is the answer.
You can be as extreme as a zero-carb carnivore.
Well, it is. Again, number one, carnivore is not extreme. It's species-appropriate, species-specific. It's normal. It's natural. It's what the human body is designed for by, well, millions of years of positive and negative selection pressures. And number two, a carnivore diet actually isn't zero carb. It's just very, very near zero because there is actually carbohydrate to be found in meat. As part of the structure of the muscle fibers, they have carbohydrates in them. It's just so close to zero as makes no odds. Which should also tell you how much carbohydrate you ought to eat, really. Make sense? Maybe that goes up your flagpole. Right, what's next?
Low-carb vegan if you want.
No, Michael. Absolutely under no circumstances. No. I'm not even going to go there in explaining why it is that what you've just said is absolutely fucking inane. Sorry about my French. That is the stupidest thing you've said in this video. Easily. What's next?
A million and one ways to do that.
You've said a million and one, and you've given us one. You've said exercise. And that's not the answer. The answer is don't eat carbs.
Yes, I suggest experimenting and trying on a diet that works for you.
You need to follow a diet that's appropriate for your species because that will work for everybody. Because we're all the same species. Our DNA is basically, to all intents and purposes, identical between individuals. Black, white, or sky blue, pink. Very little difference between any of us. Okay?
You know, that sleep and circadian rhythm and light hygiene, very important to the...
Important, yes, but not remotely as important as not eating carbohydrates.
This whole process of cardiometabolic disease.
That's not a process of cardiometabolic disease that you've got on the board there, Michael. That is some inane scrawling and some circles that you've drawn on the board with nothing whatever to do with metabolic fitness, wellness, health, or anything else. It's rubbish.
So making sure that you're going to bed at the same time, you're waking up at the same time.
No, not at the same time, at the appropriate time. See how that's a different thing?
We know that cold exposure, thermal stress, actually is a big factor. There was just a study that came out late February of 2022 finding that the ability of brown fat to mobilize fatty acids and to be active is linked with metabolic health. And so there's some really good research to support.
Again, not metabolic health because you still haven't defined that.
That we can go down the road of dietary supplements. I'm a huge fan of inositol.
Why?
Specifically myo-inositol.
Why?
berberine as well.
Why?
Well, I'll put links below to some different ideas and so.
Oh, right, some links. Right. Do you have some supplements to sell, Michael? I do too, but I can actually explain why it is that the ones I have to sell are a good idea. Can you? No? That's what I thought.
Solutions there, and certainly fasting can be very helpful as well.
Well, how are you going to define fasting? What's that?
A way to mobilize some of the stored energy.
No, it's still not energy. It's still actual matter. It's still fat, carbohydrates, amino acids, if you're going to be using those for energy, which most people won't until you've got no fat or carbohydrate left, of course.
The triglyceride buildup in your adipose tissue, your fat tissue, to utilize that as fuel when you are in a fasted state. So those are the things. Lower your carbs, exercise.
0, yeah.
More?
Exercise plus or minus. You need to get some appropriate advice on how to do that correctly because, like anything, it's possible to do it very wrong. And most people that give exercise advice give very poor exercise advice, Michael. Given your advice regarding lipids and metabolic health, I suspect your advice on exercise is also going to be poor. Sorry about that.
Make sure you're balancing your stress and circadian rhythms.
Sure.
Getting cold on purpose, and then
not necessarily
periodic feeding window compression and fasting.
But that's, hang on, a periodic feeding window is not fasting. If you're talking about doing one meal a day, that's not fasting. Fasting starts at about 72 hours, in fact, as an operational definition.
Is a phenomenal way to, again, improve cardiometabolic health. And
again, are you going to define that at any stage? No, still, okay.
Reduce this post-meal atherosclerosis that is...
No. Atherosclerosis develops glacially over decades, remember? Not after a meal. Okay.
So common, and leading to premature death from heart disease and stroke.
Sure. But not because of a meal. Because of many, many meals. Over decades. Okay?
Okay. So hopefully you found this video helpful.
No, Michael, except for grist for my mill, actually, to help educate my people still further. Perhaps to amuse them. They do find this kind of thing funny, generally, because my audience are quite well educated. I suggest, Michael, that you join us and become one of the educated. And the way to do that, Mike, is to binge watch all my videos and you'll learn a great deal. Because at the moment, son, sorry, you're completely out of your depth, completely out of your lane. And I suggest you stop it because it's embarrassing for you. Or it should be if it isn't. I think that's enough. Frankly, you're summing up, so we don't need to hear the rest of it. In the meantime, you know what to do. Hit the like button, subscribe to my fine channel here. Again, studies show that failure to subscribe to my channel leads to early death from cardiometabolic dysfunction. Also, failure to hit the like button is highly correlated with visits from Yellow Ted with his wetsuit with the bottom cut out and his rampant wildebeest. You don't want that either, any more than the yellow truncheon thing, to be fair. Studies show a lot of things, frankly. Studies show that you should join me next time when someone else will be wrong on the interwebs, because it doesn't look like slowing down anytime soon, does it? In the meantime, enjoy the dulcet tones of Vivaldi, the Four Seasons. This is Movement 1, Spring.